The mystery of the author in Gravity Falls is one of the most defining anxieties and promises of that show for its first season and a half. And indeed, after the author is discovered, the show begins to progress toward its conclusion. Yet most interesting to me is not the mystery, but the character dynamics. Not the riddle, but the tension and the beautifully poignant character work and thematic ideas that come out of the revelation of the author. Surprises can only happen once. Riddles can only be solved once. But the fountain of character, of interpersonal interaction, is a much deeper one. Stanford Pines, not to be confused with his loving scoundrel of a brother, Stan Lee Pines, is the smart one. He is constantly defined by himself and others as the smart one. He even shares his name with the most elite university on the West Coast, which I cannot imagine was accidental on the part of the show. Though it admittedly took me too long to realize that. Stanford's life was not easy, necessarily. He was always mocked for being the outsider dork. And the fact that he had an extra finger, 6 instead of 5, leading to the 6-fingered journal, did not help matters. But nonetheless, he is not a simple heroic figure in Gravity Falls, not simply the example of intelligence and hard work and dedication overcoming the shallow anti-intellectual prejudices of others. Rather, Stanford exists almost as a warning for Dipper. An image of who he could be, which Dipper understands very clearly, but also perhaps who he should try not to be, and whose mistakes he should try not to repeat, which Dipper does not intuit initially. Stanford's greatest asset is also his greatest liability, and it is one that Dipper shares. It is this reliance on his own intelligence, his own determination, his own individual drive for understanding the world better, coupled with the underlying assumption that other people are more or less distractions to that fountain of understanding and knowledge. Considering how both were teased quite relentlessly, it seems, as boys, such a belief is not unfounded, but it is one that leads to rather negative consequences. And in Stanford, the show demonstrates what can happen when that tendency toward isolation, toward the idea of the solitary genius, is taken too far. And the critique is not that Dipper and Stanford are not as smart as they think they are. They willingly accept their lack of understanding, and that's why they want to know more. They can be arrogant at times, but they fully understand that there are things about the world in terms of science and observation that they know not. What they are perhaps not as willing to understand is that there are also things, arguably more important things, about human connection and human relationships that they also are lacking in. This is not a question of simple, nerdy awkwardness toward other people, which the show does not criticize either of them for having. That's a personality trait more than anything else. But there is something deeper, which is a desire that other people should matter, that other people are really worth caring about and sacrificing for, even when it's hard. That is something that Stanford does not really understand, and it causes him a degree of emptiness, and it makes him a somewhat lesser person, as opposed to Dipper, who, despite idolizing Stanford, idolizing the author, is consistently more willing to devote himself to those personal relationships. The most important of these, of course, being his relationship with his sister, Mabel. The paralleling of the stories of the two pairs of twins, is one of the most effective choices the show made. Quite a few people theorized from the beginning of the show, from episode 3, that Stan Lee had a twin, and that twin might be the author. And this theory became so widespread that Alex Hirsch went out of his way to manipulate people a little bit in the fandom to throw them off that track, which is honestly kind of funny, and is at least a better choice than changing the mystery because someone already guessed the answer. But what really matters about this is not the mystery. That's less and less important, especially as we get further and further from the release of the show. What matters is the paralleling of the two pairs of twins. Ford and Stanley used to be close. Then their relationship fell apart and they went on two very separate paths. Stan Lee lived a rather unfortunate life in the proverbial gutters, the proverbial margins of society, while Stan Ford ultimately, despite setbacks, got what he wanted, the chance to live a secluded researcher's life in a little shack in the woods in the Pacific Northwest, and he discovered a lot of things, but he also severed himself from connection from other people. He became the town recluse. He became known as being quite weird. And he rejects opportunities to reconnect with his brother, both at the time, 30 years ago, and again, even after Stan Lee brings him back from the void. He is a very brilliant, very daring person. He's had a lot of great adventures, but at the same time, he can also be selfish. He can also be uncaring. He is not particularly adept at human relationships or human connection. And the show does not hold Stanford up as a model for Dipper, even though it depicts Dipper taking him as a model. Gravity Falls as a show constantly emphasizes the necessity of human connection, of human relationality. Think to my research of someone like William Morris or John Ruskin, that very much grounded individual creativity in this larger social whole, discussing how the mere pursuit of individual fancy is often solipsistic and limited and inevitably confined to the caprices and tendencies of a particular era and a particular time, unless it is grounded in a deeper sense of history and a deeper sense of community, and a deeper sense of connection to the landscape, to the natural environment, and to the social environment, to human beings working together toward a common end. When one gets away from that, real suffering and isolation can ensue. The great example from this in the 19th century is the story of John Stuart Mill, the great philosopher who was raised as a child by his strict father to mostly scorn human connections and see the world only in terms of utility, only in terms of what will do the most good for the most people on an abstract level, and setting aside the life of the emotions, the life of real human connection, and the meshy, haunting relationality of life. And it made him absolutely miserable. There's this really striking passage in his autobiography where he admits that he asked himself that if he had what he wanted, if the ends he was working toward in ensuring the utility of people, ensuring that they lived rational, orderly, organized lives, if all that was fulfilled, would he be happy? Would he find any joy in life? And he realized, no, he wouldn't. So he went into a deep breakdown and read a lot of Wordsworth and discovered the importance of poetry, not just poetry as in, lines of verse, but poetry in this deeper sense of the other side of the world, the side of human passions and human joy and devotion and beauty in the world. Stanford does not have that revelation. Or at least, if he does, it's right at the end, when he decides to embrace his brother and travel around with him and reclaim the lost dreams of their youth. This is a final revelation that is a bit awkwardly handled. It does not seem particularly organic. And I think the show could have done a better job setting the stage for it in its last few episodes. But nonetheless, as an endpoint for Stanford's character, it represents a necessary and meaningful point of development. What ultimately did Stanford gain from all his years in the woods, all his years in the void? He learned a lot about this town. He learned a lot about its mysteries. And that's good. That's knowledge. But it doesn't seem to have made him a better person. It doesn't seem also to have made him any happier. He seems committed to his journeys. But they don't seem to have brought him lasting satisfaction and contentment. He is deeply stung by the betrayal of Bill, whom he only trusted because Bill appealed to his arrogance, to his conceitedness. And he's smart enough to know he does not want to be that rather exploited, rather foolish, completely insular person he used to be, but he doesn't know who he really wants to be anymore. and his life seems to be one lacking real connections. This is not what Dipper wants for himself, and this is certainly not what Mabel wants for Dipper. While I think it is understandable to feel a bit frustrated by Mabel's behavior at times and how Dipper constantly has to sacrifice for her, it is also important to realize that those sacrifices help Dipper too. They keep him a human being. They keep him from floating off into this world of pure intellect, pure mind, pure research, and devoid of any sense of human commitments. Those commitments can be exhausting, they can be annoying at times. But for the show, they really matter. And in fact, they matter more than all these little hidden secrets about the town and all its supernatural mysteries. The supernatural mysteries for the show are important, and the show is interested in them, but that's not the core of the show. The core of the show is the relationship between Dipper and Mabel, the bond of the twins. And that prioritization is one that Dipper ultimately understands as well. He does want to be an adult, be a responsible scientist, make discoveries, not be teased for things like his birthmark, which itself is kind of a interesting parallel to Ford's 6 fingers. But more important than all that is that he wants to be with his sister. He wants to grow up with her. This is the most important realization for Dipper to come to. It is essential to what the show is doing. It is essential to the show's ethos. Instead of he becoming more like Ford, scorning people for being less intelligent, less willing to explore the mysteries of the universe, or just kind of being shallow and banal at times, and instead just living in this pure life of research, the show emphasizes that Ford's way, whatever its merits and whatever its appeal, and however admirable Ford is in a lot of ways, did not bring him lasting peace and satisfaction, and instead it left him isolated and lacking human connections. And this is a lack. This is a bad thing for Dipper, for the show. And it is important for, number one, Ford to turn more toward Dipper, meaning more back toward Dipper's way of thinking, toward reconnecting with his brother, Stan Lee. And it is essential for Dipper to admire Ford without copying his mistakes, not just with Bill, but with his overall attitude toward life, and instead fully commit to his bond with his sister, that bond which is the alpha and omega of this show. So thank you all for watching. If you liked your saw today, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Donate to my Patreon if you can, and you want to see more videos just like this one before anyone else does. Thank you all again. Keep watching Gravity Falls. It is a great show. Adios, comrades.